Welcome back for another video about alternate 40k rules. On this one, I'm going to be continuing a multi-part video set for the Imperial Guard and overviewing their codex, going over their various abilities that they have, their various units, and eventually their tactics when I get done with all of that. Last video, we did the infantry and went through all the many formations that they have available. And in this video, I wanted to start going over their tanks. Known for their large infantry formations, and more importantly, their massive variety of armored vehicles that they can bring to the battle. This is going to be a very large video and broken into multiple parts. I'm going to focus on what would we call your battle tanks or your main battle tanks today. Like before, they number in 4 trillion fighting men and women across the galaxy, not counting planetary defense forces. And their vehicles are, while a bit rudimentary and primitive in design compared to some of the other Xeno races or even some of the Imperial weaponry, such as the Space Marine tanks, they're very, very heavily armored and heavily upgunned. To start with, they do have some rules that go unique to them. There are a variety of units that can bring tank orders to the field. These operate exactly like infantry orders. The difference is all tanks are considered to have vox casters built in, meaning if you fail to receive the order, you can re-roll it. Same 12-inch true aura like before. They have out of these 6 options, they have bring it down. Affected units may re-roll ones to wound or penetrate this shooting phase. And this works like prior, where you would nominate something such as a Leman Russ squadron, and all Leman Russ squadrons within range would test. You have get back in the fight. Affected units rally if fleeing, or it can be used to remove a fear effect from a unit, but not both. You could cast it again, of course, to do the other. Shoot and scoot. Affected units may move d6 inches at the end of the shooting phase. This is very kind of important here about the timing. The unit can shoot and engage in fire with everyone else. Moving at the end of the shooting phase means they don't have to worry about obstructing lines of fire that you've carefully set up in your movement phase. It does mean they are not able to fire and then move out of the way for another unit to get a line of sight, so you will need a plan for that. It is one good way to get away from a melee army that is closing in on you. Incoming. Affected units become pinned at the end of the shooting phase with an extra +1 to the cover save. Basically, a unit battens its hatches, locks down the ammo box, anything that's loose, and just prepares to get hit hard. You can grind them to dust. Affected units may roll ones to hit in your upcoming assault phase this round. Bit of a desperation one there. This one's going to get used more if you have a surplus of orders. They also can be very good on Baneblades, as we'll get into, because they hit very hard in melee. They're not particularly accurate, though. And then units with dozer blades can also get some degree of accuracy to help offset that. This last one that we came up with was Scratch My Back. Affected units may fire Strength 5 or less weapons into melee with a friendly tank, but no friendly infantry or monstrous infantry. Every roll of a 1-2 hit counts as a hit against your own unit, randomized if there is more than one. Flame templates are allowed to overlap friendly models in this instance. The ability ends at the end of the shooting phase. This is an actual tactic that tanks use, called Scratch My Back. That's where they lock down their hatches and then they pour machine gun fire over each other to get infantry off. It was very, very heavily developed in Vietnam due to the guerrilla warfare that they were experiencing in the close encounters in the jungle. It had been around for a while, but it really received a proper doctrination in the United States Army at that time. Now going into our various battle tanks here. There is an HQ option for this. It's called the Tank Commander that everyone knows and loves. It's a standard Leman Russ with the difference of hitting on a 3+ instead of a 4+ for ranged attacks. Its movement is an 8. It's a little bit slower than you would see in its later edition counterparts. It's a big, heavy tank. It should not be moving at the speeds of a medium or light tank. Weapon skill is a 5+. It's a tank, not exactly an agile combat walker. The aforementioned 3+ ballistic skill comes in with a strength of 7, allowing it to ram other tanks fairly hard if you need to. And then in the odd time when it does manage to hit someone in melee, it's going to have quite a bit of force. Front armor is a 14. Now, as a recap, for those who have not read the main rulebook or are not familiar with older editions, to defeat an armor value, you use the strength of the weapon plus d6 instead of rolling to wound like normal. This is called to penetrate roll. A 14 means that a crack missile at best can score a 14, which is a glance. It can't even penetrate it on the front. And a las cannon has to have a 6. This makes Leman Russes one of the harder tanks to destroy in the game, and as far as shooting goes, it's very resilient. Getting into its side armor, it's a 13. Most tanks, with the exceptions of like the Land Raider from the Space Marines, will see a drastic drop in armor on the sides, but the Leman Russ still maintains a very heavy, thick armor plating. Its rear armor is a 10. Meaning it's a standard rear armor for most vehicles. Crack missiles are now penetrating on a 3+. It's very vulnerable on the rear. That is how you best want to bust a Leman Russ unit, is to get them to put a poor armor facing towards you, or use a highly mobile unit to get your shot on the rear. Clarification for those familiar with older rules, there used to be 3 of the Leman Russ variants with a rear armor of 11, and it's supposed to represent their heavily up-armored turret for the Punisher, the Demolisher, and the Executioner Nova plasma cannon. We resolved that as it wasn't necessary and became a bit of a problem child for interacting and inserting the other Leman Russ variants in the game. Simplicity is not always a bad thing. Carrying on down the stat line, we have a wound of 12, which is standard for your battle tanks. Its initiative is 1, of course, being a tank. Attacks 3, leadership 9, and a save of 3+ for against glances. Once again, iterate for penetrations. You don't get your armor save. Once it penetrates, it's gone straight through. The point of this was to just develop a highly resistant to heavy machine gun fire that you did not see in 8th and 9th edition, where heavy bolters were the Imperial Guard's best option for killing tanks, and it was very disconcerting and weird. It has a huge variety of armament. In fact, it has 10 main cannon options. And I'm not going to go into each into great detail. You're always welcome to check the rulebook out yourself if you want to see. For those familiar with 5th, 6th, and 7th editions, you're going to find these cannons are very familiar to what you're used to. You've got, by default, the Nova Eradicator Cannon. It's a bit short-ranged at 36 inches by Imperial Guard standards, short-ranged. Strength 6 AP 4+ with a 5-inch blast that ignores cover. It's awesome clearing out light and medium troops. You can upgrade it up to an Executioner Plasma Cannon, which drops 3 Plasma Cannon templates. Each one does get hot, but it draws a lot of firepower on heavy infantry. There's a Vanquisher Battle Cannon. This one we have altered. It is a 72-inch range cannon, Strength Destroyer, Armor Piercing 2+, Heavy 1. Destroyer Monster Bane. Destroyer means it always wounds the target or penetrates the target on a 2+, because 1s always fail, ignores cover, armor saves, and vulnerability saves, and feel no pain. It does not have blast, meaning you're only hitting on a 3+, or in the case of a standard Leman Russ, a 4+, but when it does, it's going to be absolutely brutal and punishing. And lastly, because of Destroyer, against Titanic units, you're doing 2 extra wounds each time you successfully wound them. With Monster Bane and penetration chart results on vehicles, it can do anywhere from 4 to 5 wounds to a Titanic target each shot. We don't have multi-damage weapons traditionally in this edition, so this makes this a very powerful weapon for killing potent targets. We have 2 linked las cannons for the old Annihilator pattern. 2 linked Exterminator autocannons. They are traditional autocannons that can reroll misses. This is very good for Overwatch, shooting at aircraft, shooting with -1 penalties from spells. Overall, they're just very reliable. They hit often, and they have a good cannon all around. Good for firing close fire support without risk of scattering into friendly troops, as we've all done as Imperial Guard players with templates. There's the Almighty Punisher Gatling gun with 20 shots of Strength 5 AP dash. The Conqueror Battle Cannon, which is a Strength 8 AP3 plus 5-inch blast cannon. It does not have ordnance like your traditional battle cannon. This is a Forge World model, but it does bring a coaxial Stormbolter that can make it very accurate and good for hitting a hard target. This is going to be best suited for light tanks and monstrous infantry, that kind of thing. The battle cannon itself, almighty 72 inches of range, strength 8 AP3 plus, 5-inch blast again, but it has ordnance as well. This allows it to pin units that it hits them, roll twice and pick the best for penetrating vehicles, and just overall just punish the enemy. Thanks to grinding advance, the Leman Russ is able to move and fire ordnance weapons when this is normally not allowed. This allows the Leman Russ to be a very terrifying opponent that can slowly close in and destroy your foes, and they are unable to penetrate its front armor, or struggle to do so. Then we have the legendary Demolisher Cannon. While it only has 24 inches of range, its strength 10 AP2 plus, 5-inch blast with ordnance. It is the absolute last words in the terms of overwhelming firepower. It can deal with anything that's within short range, and is going to remove it from the face of the planet. Going back into Forge World, there is the long-barreled Vanquisher Cannon with a coaxial Stormbolter. This is just like the traditional Vanquisher Cannon, except that it has the accurate rule, giving it a +1 to hit, and it has a coaxial Stormbolter, which, while it is short range, does let you reroll misses. I've used this, and it sounds a bit odd to have a 24-inch rapid-fire coaxial weapon. Forge World developed it, not me, but it has been useful to be able to shoot at someone when they close in to deal with a threat to get a very high degree of accuracy. Due to its accurate rule on a tank commander, it's hitting on a 2+ already, and it's very hard to miss. Also have been able to get some Overwatch hits due to the Stormbolter being able to score a hit, allowing the long Vanquisher Cannon to reroll misses as well. The accuracy doesn't affect snapshots, but the coaxial does. Now, with those turret options done, we've got a bunch of hull weapons that go in the front. We have the Heavy Flamer, the Heavy Bolter, and the Las Cannon, which is pretty standard. Your responses that are optional upgrades, you have 2 Heavy Flamers, 2 Heavy Bolters, 2 Multi-Lasers, going back into old Epic 40k for those of you who are wondering why those are available. 2 Plasma Cannons, 2 Auto Cannons, once again thanks to Epic 40k. Oh, and 2nd edition as well. 2 Multi-Meltas for those who want just tons of firepower. Pintle weapons, you have a Stormbolter, a Light Stubber, and a Heavy Stubber. You can only take one of those, of course, just like the sponson sets and everything. Light Stubbers and Heavy Stubbers, we tried to differentiate them more properly. So Light Stubbers and Heavy Stubbers used to exist back in old editions, such as 2nd edition. The Light Stubber is strength 4, heavy 3, as you'll see in a lot of later editions. The Heavy Stubber, it's really just a big 50 cal, it's strength 5, AP 6 plus, heavy 3. Costs a few more points. It's a lot more visually fitting, and GW at some point decided, I think 3rd or 4th edition, after that they decided to get rid of the Heavy Stubber option, and they kept calling it a Heavy Stubber because of the models display the pieces it came with, but they actually gave it the light stubber stats, and I just wanted to restore that and get it correct. You're allowed to get a Dozer Blade option, and it gives strength +1, AP 6+, the Dozer Blade rule inaccurate, giving them a +1 to hit melee. Dozer Blade allows you to roll dangerous terrain tests and failed move through cover test, so you don't get your tank stuck for the rest of the game inside the wall of a building. I've done this multiple times. It's a 1 in 6 chance. Getting to reroll that is very, very helpful. The extra strength is nice, and so is the accuracy as well. If nothing else, it's another ranged weapon that can be potentially disabled instead of one of your cannons. Last weapon, you can of course take the Hunter Killer Missile, which is a 120-inch strength 10 AP 3+, one use only missile. There's some additional war gear options you can take on these tanks, and these are all very common across the entire codex, so I won't go into them every single time. But you have an Augur Array for 5 points. Now let's say 6-inch aura, target unit does not scatter when deep striking. The aura is cast when the first model is placed prior to scattering. This is an exception to the normal rules. This is good for bringing in stormtroopers or drop sentinels danger close to get that lethal, potent flamethrower or melta close range off that you need without risk of pinning your troops by having them crash into units. There is a camo netting to give yourself shroud. This can be really good when you're hunkering down and playing defensive inside a bunker or something like that. You can get down to a 2+ cover save just by existing. There's an extra armor. You can treat all crew stuns as crew shaken results. This is optional and you can choose each time it happens, but if you need to remain mobile to get away from a melee army, or you need to get somewhere to deliver troops as a transport, that can be really critical. There's recovery gear. It basically allows you to, at any point, roll a d6 once per turn. On a 5+, you get to ignore one immobilized or crew stun results. Help keep that mobility going. There's a searchlight. Because the beginning of the game can start with night fighting, it's a 50% chance. It's on a 4+, it happens. That means anything further than 12 inches away gets a 4+ cover save. And that can be really detrimental for the Guard as a shooting army. They don't have fancy night vision for the most part, like Space Marines or anything like that. So they bring searchlights. The model using the searchlight, or the unit using the searchlight, and then the target unit that you want is no range, is no longer considered to be affected by night rules because they've been lit up. If you're going second, exposing yourself is an issue because night fighting rules go away on the next turn, and then they never come back. But Searchlight has been the detriment of many Xenos foes, and I've always enjoyed using them. They're very cheap as well, and I think they're thematically important, and that's the most important thing of all. Last thing, the most useful piece of equipment you can get is a smoke launchers. It's one of the more expensive war gears. It's 10 points for a tank, or 20 for a Titanic tank. It gives you a 6-inch range. It works a little different than other rules, but you put out a 5-inch smoke cloud that causes a -1 to hit and scatters from weapons to move an extra +1 inches until your command phase. It's one use only and it's used in your shooting phase only, so you do have to plan ahead of time, but allows you to fire and screen troops or yourself. You can even just shoot in front of the enemy just to cause a problem. If they're staying inside a bunker, you just smoke the bunker itself at that point. It would be it's fired when you nominate the unit to do its thing, so in that case you may want to shoot at the bunker with whatever else and then fire smoke at the end of the turn and have the tank shoot last. Your strategies will dictate what you want to do there. That is a very versatile tool, and I have never regretted taking them at any point. Alright, next up we have a unique tank commander from very old editions called Captain Obadiah Sphere. I'm still working on getting one myself, but he drives a Leman Russ named Steel Dog Alpha. Him and his crew, they command the Steel Dog Alpha, and it's always equipped with a long Vanquisher cannon, Stormbolter, and a las cannon. You can take a pintle option if you want, and a dozer blade, and a hunter killer missile, but he is not allowed to take sponsons. You can take any of your equipment upgrades like normal. Special things that he brings to the field is in addition to tank orders 1, he has an infantry orders 1. He's supposed to be from Kelly's Heroes, where he has loudspeakers that are playing instead of soothing music to keep the troops calm and to pacify the Germans. In this case, it's rock from his home world to inspire his troops to fight harder. Same thing, because he's hitting on a 3, and then he has a long vanquisher cannon, he's able to accurately hit people on a 2+. He also has a weapon skill of a 4+. He's supposed to be fairly good at ramming units, so with a dozer blade, he's able to hit on a 3. He's a very good unit all around. He does have a rule called the 254th Varolian Regiment. This model ignores all regiment rules for your army. He is not dictated by the doctrines of other regiments. He is simply brought along to serve as an advisor. And the Varolian Regiment has never existed on the tabletop or had a model range to work with, so it has simply come across as a advisor that can be ported into any army that you need further tank commanders from for a variety to give infantry orders as well as tank orders, and just have an overall fairly potent punch against heavy armored targets. Another very old model. This goes back to the Forge World Baneblade. This would be the very first Baneblades produced that were not armor cast. You have Maximilian Wiseman. He commands a Baneblade called Arethusa. It is a Mars pattern Baneblade. Default, this is coming back when you couldn't even take a second set of sponsons. You only had 2 sponsons, and they were required. He's got a Baneblade cannon, coaxial autocannon like normal. Baneblade cannon is a terrifying gun, 72 inches of range and a 10-inch blast with ordnance. And of course, it's coaxial. There's a demolisher cannon, 2 linked heavy bolters, and then 2 sets of las cannons and 2 linked heavy bolters for the sponsons. He is limited in war gear he's able to take because of his unique standing and his defined war gear options in lore, but he can take a pintle weapon, a hunter killer missile, and the standard equipment options. He has tank orders 1. He can transport 12 in the rear like standard Baneblade. He also ignores your regimental rules because he is of a different regiment who's in the past been brought in for advisory purposes. He has a hardened crew rule. This model gains immobilized and weapon disable results on a 4+ roll for each instance. This means every time you get immobilized or weapon disabled, you get to roll a d6, and there's 50% chance you just ignore it altogether. You still take the additional wound count, of course. Ill-fated. Arethusa was disabled in a bog, which is not normal for Titanic units in alternate 40k rules. And when it got pinned in the bog in lore, the crew had to abandon the tank, and most of them were slain or went missing. So in this, to help bring that in, Arethusa still destroys non-Titanic terrain and moving through terrain like normal, but must roll a d6 each time it does so on any kind of terrain. On a 1, it is stuck for the rest of the game. Gives a little bit of discount. It is a 925 point advisor before a couple additional upgrades that are available. It's very expensive. I myself am working on getting it's a Lucius pattern Baneblade. I quoted myself wrong there. I have a Mars pattern. I'm working on getting a Lucius pattern. They're very hard to find. Best I've found so far is a recast site of questionable repute that has one for over $400. And yeah, it's just hard to get that old stuff. There's an elite slot, Lehman Russ chassis. It's not technically a battle tank, but because it uses its chassis, I thought I would include it here. It has the same armor values and all the stats of a standard Lehman Russ. It has no weapons by default. It can choose a heavy flamer or heavy bolter in the hull. They can take a pintle weapon, a dozer blade, and a hunter killer missile. What it does instead is it has a heavy repair gear. So a 3-inch target vehicle or Titanic vehicle recovers D3 wounds, and on a 3+, remove 1 weapon disabled, crew stun, immobilized, or weapon destroyed result. Of course, this doesn't remove the additional wounds suffered from those results either. And lastly, it has an escort rule. This model may join units as if it were an independent character. It's a very old model. I've almost gotten my hands on one 2 or 3 times now. They tend to go for quite a bit of money. You don't see them very much anymore, and they have no rules, which I think is a real shame. With its heavy armor, it's capable of approaching damaged vehicles in the open or in a very hostile terrain. It's not particularly a threat. They tend to be ignored when we've done proxy tests with them. And this helps follow along with a Leman Russ unit to keep them in the fight, or even keep up with Baneblades because it has very similar armor facings, even it doesn't have the wound count. I personally think an army should include one in an apocalypse battle, or 2 or 3 even, just because they're able to roll around and they're very cost effective for the amount of intense firepower. If you had tried to bring a different repair unit or an engine seer, they're just going to get killed instantly by being near these tanks, the amount of heavy fire they're drawing, but this one's able to do so. In addition, if you can join a unit, such as the Leman Russ Squadron, it can take hits on behalf of the Leman Russes it's with. And since a fully loaded Demolisher cannon, Demolisher Leman Russ can easily run up to 300 points apiece, having a 135-point advisor be able to take damage initially is not a bad option either. And of course, it can just repair itself as well. Getting into fast attacks, there are a variety of high-speed tanks that the Imperial Guard can use. Most of their tanks are heavy, but they do have some fast ones. The first one is the Forge World Artemia Pattern Hellhound Squadron. You don't see a lot of these anymore just because Forge World's always been hard to get a hold of and their rules have dropped off. But we wanted to make sure the Artemia was represented properly, so it has its own entry because it can't take the other Hound weapon options that we'll get into shortly. Its movement is 10, it's a bit slower because it's been an up-armored chassis. Strength of 6, which is standard for Chimera chassis frames. Front armor of 12, side armor of 12, and rear armor of 11 because of that up armoring. And its wounds, it's up to 12. Otherwise, has fairly standard stats. They can take up to 2 more in a squadron. They can swap their whole weapons around as needed for the variety of standard weapons that the Hounds can go for, which means heavy flamer, heavy bolter, multi-melta. They can take pintle, dozer blades, and missiles. It has a special rule in large fuel tanks. It can reroll 1s to wound with flame weapons. The model explodes on a 4+ instead of a 6+. I'm still working on getting a couple of these for my collection, so I don't have any pictures to show for myself. They're a very cool looking tank, and if anyone has them, definitely should showcase them. They're very awesome looking. I think they're very thematic, and they just scream Imperial Guard and grimdark futures. There is a standard Hound Squadron. This is a Chimera-based chassis again. They've been given out their transport capacity to have 2 armor added to the sides. They have wounds of 11 normally, and the rear armor of 10, with a movement of 12, to kind of compare them to the Artemia. So they're a little faster, not quite as armored in the rear, and they don't have quite as many wounds. By default, they start with what's called a chem cannon. It's a flame template, strength 3, AP 3+, with a poison 2+ turret. This is most suited for hunting monstrous infantry. You can do monsters. You don't have Monster Bane to really drive the hit home, but they can do it just fine. Heavy infantry are also very good targets for them, like Space Marines. They're very lethal and very one-minded. And of course, with Poison 2+, it can still chase down light infantry as needed. There is a Inferno cannon. It's a flame template again with strength 6, AP 3. And while it's still wounding light infantry on a 2, most monstrous infantry on 3s, it does have the versatility being able to hit vehicles with strength 6. It is able to deal damage to light vehicles quite readily or on weak points. With movement 12, it's quite able to get anywhere it needs to threaten them. There is one last option, is the Melta Cannon from the Devil Dog. 24-inch range, strength 8, AP 1 plus. It's a 3-inch blast Melta, so you get within half range, you get that extra d6 to penetrate. This is with a blast as opposed to a standard shot. It's going to be more likely to hit a large target due to how scatter rules work. This can be a really big boon for Imperial Guard players because hitting on a 4+ can be difficult. Combined with the vehicle speed, once again, it is able to put quite a bit of threat on target, and it can still threaten monstrous infantry and even monsters with quite readily. Especially if you're shooting at large vehicle squadrons or just large vehicles in general, such as the Baneblade, it is going to be very hard to miss the target. It can take the standard heavy flamer, bolter, multi-melta in the hull, and all the standards, pintles, dozer blades, and missiles like normal. Going back into Epic 40k rules, as well as some old 1st edition and 2nd edition rules that were brought in by, I believe his name was Josh Fox or something like that. He was one of the early Imperial Guard designers, and he wanted to have a Sentinel proxy that was a tank. So thanks to him having a couple options there, we have tankettes available. The first one is a Skilla Squadron. They come in units of 3 to 10 tankettes. They have a movement of 12, strength, hit on a 4+ range attacks, 5 for melee, strength 5, armor 10, and the front, side, and rear, 5 wounds, initiative 1, tax 3, 2, 3 for the sergeant, and then leadership, because you have a sergeant tank, has leadership 8, and then all the others have a 7 with a 3+ armor save. You can add additional ones at 56 points each. And they come by default with a heavy flamer in the hull. They only have hull-mounted weapons, and they can upgrade this to multi-lasers, auto-cannons, las cannons, and they can choose to take a hunter killer missile. It's supposed to be very similar to the Scout Sentinel. Rule-wise, they bring the outflank rule, letting them come in from a randomized table edge, turn 2 or later. There's also a Siegfried Squadron, if you want more of a Krieg look and a little bit heavier armored of a tankette. They move at speed 10, same armor facings of 10 all around, but they have 6 wounds each. And they have a turret instead of a hull. They do cost a few more points for the turret upgrades, but they lose the outflank rule, and they can take all the same options, but they have the ability to fire in any direction as needed. Getting into heavy support, we have the Forge World Carnodon Squadron. This is the only really, at the point of this video being made, the only real medium battle tank that the Imperial Guard bring to the table. I'm kind of hoping to see a few more added at some point. Just today, some 30k era tanks that have always been Forge World have been announced in plastic, as well as some upgraded weapon options. That's very exciting. I'm hoping to see a Carnodon come over to that someday because I really do enjoy how the tank looks, but their expense has kept it out of my reach so far. They have a movement of 10, hit on 4, strength 6, front armor 13, side armor of 11, rear armor of 10, 12 wounds. You can add additional ones for 134 points each. Weapon option wise, for their turret, they got a Volkite Culverin. Volkite weapons in our rules work with a beam template. So in this case, the weapon is range 48, strength 6, AP 3 plus, heavy 1 with beam. You pick a target and roll to hit them. Whether or not you hit them with your weapon skill 4 plus, you make a snapshot roll across every single unit that's in between the final target and your cannon barrel. These snapshots hit on a 5 plus instead of a 6. and cannot be modified or rerolled in any way. But because they ignore cover, it's a good way to hit squadrons of vehicles or heavy infantry, or in a pinch, just mass amounts of infantry and deal some damage. That's a good way to dig people out of cover, or if you have a tank that's using shroud or it's buttoning up behind a bunker, something that you're having a hard time pinning and destroying because you don't have a vanquisher cannon, this is a good option. Would have to hit a weak facing to really take out a vehicle. I prefer to use these to take out heavy infantry or high stealth units such as scout marines. They can go for the turret option to 2 linked multi-lasers, 2 linked autocannons, 2 linked las cannons. And then its sponsons by default comes with 2 heavy flamers, but they can be upgraded to heavy bolters, multi-lasers, autocannons, or las cannons, and can take all of your standard pintle, dozers, and missiles. I think it's honestly a very viable unit for its point cost. It's very flexible. You just don't get to see them a lot due to the difficulty in acquiring them. I hope to see that changed in the future. There is a destroyer squadron. This is a Leman Russ chassis once again, but they've foregone the turret completely, and the hull mounted weapon has been switched for a main turret option, light cannon. Its default is a heavy laser destroyer array. It's a 60-inch range, strength 9, AP2 plus, heavy 2 with ordnance. On average, you should get 1 hit every turn. With Monster Bane as well, it's definitely got a lot of nasty punch to it. And if you want something a little more direct and brutal, you can upgrade it to a Demolisher cannon in the hull for a fairly cheap cost. If you want to bring a Demolisher cannon to the field and a hard to remove target for not a lot of points, this is the best option to do that. The heavy laser destroyer array is also very good for reaching out at long range targets. It can take 100 killer missiles, pintles, and dozer blades like normal. Of course, you have your Leman Russ squadron, which is 1 to 3 Leman Russes, as of all these vehicles been so far. The tank commander is the only individual, same as the Atlas recovery tank. Apart from losing the infantry orders, it's the same thing. All these Leman Russ chassis have that grinding advance that just make them really durable. There is the Malkador, which will not be just exclusively Forge World for much longer. Strength 8, with a front armor of 13, side armor of 12, rear armor of 11, with 18 wounds. It's not quite Titanic, it's right on the edge. This means it can take a ton of beatings before it's destroyed. It doesn't have the same armor durability as a Leman Russ by any means, but in its movement it's 6, so it's not particularly fast. By default, it has quite a few options. There's a 2-link las cannon. It's kind of a sponson swing turret. It's not a full swing. That does allow them to be somewhat discounted. These turret options can be swapped out for a heavy bolter pillbox that has 5 heavy bolters pointing in all different directions, or a battle cannon. Its front hull can be swapped out, has a heavy bolter, and it can be swapped in for a las cannon or a demolisher cannon. Then it has a set of sponsons, and they're angled differently than your traditional Leman Russ. They can't aim all the way forward, but they can aim almost all the way backwards. And I have had that actually come in quite usefulness for protecting its sides. It doesn't make them quite as offensive on one target. But they're mostly there to act as stationary defenses throughout your line as you advance that have to be dealt with and don't go away anytime soon. But your sponsons, you start with 2 heavy stubbers, and they can go to heavy bolters, autocannons, and las cannons. They can take your standard pintle and missile weapons. And it looks like they're going to now get a dozer blade option, which before they traditionally did not. Next, there's the Malkador Hunter variant. Instead of the traditional sponson turret on the top, this one has a huge heavy cannon built into the hull, foregoing the whole weapon as well. This by far is my favorite one. Both of them are. It has a neutron laser projector. It is a 72-inch range, strength destroyer AP 1 plus with a 3-inch blast. That can be swapped out for 2 linked and furnace cannons. This is 2 linked versions of what the Warhound Titan can carry in a rack of 3. It's a Hellstorm, which is a very, very large flame template that is wonderful. Strength 7, AP 3 plus, and Assault 1, or 2 of them. And it brings along its own fuel cart when you have that variant, which means you get to reroll 1s to wound with a better chance to explode, for better or for worse for those who are nearby, friend or foe. It maintains similar sponson options as before. Getting back into another Lehman Russ variant, you have the Mars Alpha Squadron. Their movement is only a 6, but the rear armor is still only a 10, but they have 14 wounds each. Makes them just a little bit more durable. They're exactly the same as the Lehman Russ otherwise, with the exception of their Vanquisher cannon is a little different. Instead of having a coaxial Stormbolter, it has a coaxial Heavy Stubber. It's a little more practical in terms of being able to reach out for those easy rerolls, but it's got that long barrel, so it's got accurate on the Vanquisher cannon. Overall, I like them a lot. I think the Mars Alphas look really good. It looks like we're getting them in plastic soon as well, and I'm very excited for that. I'm not 100% sure. The releases today are still a bit spotty. We'll see what happens. Next, we got a Ragnarok Squadron. This is another Epic 40K model. This was due to shortage of Lehman Russ availability in proxies as before, when people are using like Panzers and Stugs. It was official that the KV-2 could be a proxy, and it actually has its own lore and rules and exists in its official books and everything like that. So very similar to the Mars pattern, it's only movement 6, 14 wounds, has a rear armor of 11 though. The difference is its sponson weapons are mounted upwards and in the hull, making it a little easier for them to fire forwards and get onto the same target, with a bit narrower of a profile. It's running at 199 points each, and it has grinding advance. I've got on my to-do list to make a whole bunch of these at some point. I just haven't been able to get around to them yet. The Imperial Guard is a massive codex, and finances are limited, as everyone knows that plays this game. But eventually I hope to make a squadron of each cannon variant for the Ragnaroks, because I don't have an addiction. You have an addiction. Next is the Rogaldorn Battle Tank. We've actually had this well before the release towards the end of 9th edition with the plastic Rogaldorn. If you go back to 3rd and 4th edition, there was a Land Raider variant for the Imperial Guard. It forewent its transport capacity, and it carried an Earthshaker turret that was enclosed. It had the twin las cannons for the sponsons, had a multi-melt that sat up on the turret with the cannons. It was a very cool looking tank, very large, very imposing, and it was never an official model. It was one you had to bash together from official kits. We went ahead and merged them all in together, so you can just customize your profile as you see fit. If you want to build a modern one or an old one, both are viable. Movement of 6, it's a heavy tank. It's a Land Raider chassis, which also has a 6. It has that grinding advance, of course. Hits on a 4+ for range attacks, strength 8. In lore, though, its armor has always been stripped down, even when it was a Land Raider chassis, to make room for all the weapons. So its front armor is still a 14, its side armor is a 13, and its rear armor is a 12. It has 18 wounds due to its large turret, compared to the Land Raider chassis having a 16. Initiative 1, 6 attacks, leadership 8, 3+ armor save. By default, it has the Oppressor Cannon, which is similar to the Vanquisher Cannon, the long-barreled. It's a destroyer, and it's accurate. And it has a coaxial autocannon to assist with its accuracy. It's not a lot of shots to get a good reroll, but it does bring some pretty high strength in its own right and can threaten light vehicles and heavy infantry with impunity. It can be upgraded to the Earthshaker cannon as before, so 240-inch range, strength 9, AP3 plus, 5-inch blast, ordnance. It can even fire indirect, making it a very versatile platform. And the last option is 2 linked battle cannons, which are your classic 72-inch, strength 8, AP3 plus, 5-inch blast with ordnance. If you really need to bring just a ton of pain from one model onto a target, it's a bit more point efficiency due to the chassis purchases, without having to buy 2 Lehman Russ chassis to bring a second battle cannon. It's a great way just to bring a lot of firepower onto one target and put in one small area. I personally like to use these to protect a flank due to the extra firepower. It has an additional hull weapon. By default, it has a Cascader Gatling gun, which is a heavy 12, strength 5, 24-inch range. It does not have any AP. It's good for danger close, supporting and destroying infantry. You have a pulverizer cannon, which is a 36-inch, strength 8, AP3 plus, 3-inch blast ordnance. It may not have the power of a full battle cannon due to its restricted blast size, but it can do supplemental fire and can still pound the enemy and pin them in ordnance through armor. It can also upgrade to a full demolisher cannon, like the original had back in 3rd and 4th edition. And then it has a second set of hull options due to the new plastic kits, where it can take 2 linked heavy stubbers or 2 linked melta-guns. Sponson-wise, it can choose to take 2 heavy bolters, 2 multi-meltas, or 2 sets of 2 linked las cannons, giving it a lot of firepower. It can take pintle weapons, dozer blades, thanks to old additions, and hunter killer missiles. Standard equipment options as well. I'm very pleased with the Rogaldorn. I have myself a old version as well as the one of each variant of the new type with the turret. I like them all. They all have a distinct purpose and role. I highly recommend everyone get them. I will also say this about the new Rogaldorn, and I make no commission or anything off of any of this I do. That was a very satisfying kit to build. It fit together perfectly. GW's been struggling with some of their kits lately. The Rogaldorn is not one of those kits. Everyone at some point should get one and build it and just see how satisfying it really is with all the customizable parts that come with it as well. Getting into our Lord of War slots, we're getting into all the legendary Baneblade variants. The first one is I wanted to bring back the Baneblade Company. For those familiar with 5th edition, it had a formation setup you could do for Apocalypse, so you could run units that were not designed for Titanic scale battles to actually be able to threaten Titans. I enjoyed the concept immensely, and you'll see a lot of squadron upgrades in our other codexes where traditionally in the rules that we based off of, a lot of these tanks like Falcons couldn't come in squadrons. The Baneblade Company was always one of my favorite. We did modify it a little bit, but it allows you to take 1 to 3 Baneblades as a Lord of War instead of just having one heavy tank. All Baneblade variants are movement of 6, weapon skill of 5+, ballistic skill of 4+, strength 9, armor 14 in the front, 13 on sides, 12 in the rear, 26 wounds, 1 initiative, 9 attacks, 8 leadership, and saves on 3+. They're Titanic vehicles, meaning any melee attack you do has an AP of 2+ by default, unless you have a weapon attached. One of these, coming in at 783 points bare bones, no side skirts or guns, just the main armament of a Baneblade cannon, coaxial autocannon, demolisher cannon, and then 2 linked heavy bolters in the hull. One of these can be upgraded to a Baneblade commander, weapon skill 4+, plus skill 3+, 1 better leadership, and they have tank orders of 1. Because they're Titanic, they're also fearless, and almost all Baneblade variants have transport 12 or better with rear access. If you want to, you can take up to 4 sponsons. And each one is a las cannon and 2 heavy bolters or 2 heavy flamers. If you take none of those, you can instead take a side skirts, which give you a +1 armor facing on the side to a 14. I like to do this with my recon Baneblade company. I prefer them to have a better rear side armor that makes them cheaper and more expendable to use as kind of a heavy scout unit. Help draw some fire and work the flanks. Or if they have to make a run through an enemy, they've got that side armor to help make a punch where they need to without getting destroyed completely. They can take a Baneblade Dozer Blade, giving it a +1 strength, AP 2+, and accurate. That's an old Forge World kit you can find. Good luck getting them. They are out there. They look amazing. There is a Hunter Killer Missile and Pintle options as well. These things can easily be racking up near 1,000 points each, fully loaded. And with a fully loaded Baneblade company, it can be almost 3,000 points on its own right. For those of you concerned about balance test, this is something I tried to break myself. Bringing 3 of them with an upgraded commander, and I was able to squeeze in just a minimum amount of veterans and a commissar, Lord Commissar, for my HQ. And it was a tremendous amount of firepower, but they had nothing to push through a building where an enemy was taking cover. There was a bit of a dangerous Tyrannid blob in there, and I couldn't deal with it too much. He couldn't deal with me. Then I spent the entirety of the battle trying to just take what few objective markers I could, and spent most of it having to play keep away. And this, we've tried a few other games as well, trying to break it, and it's a really awesome list to bring for fun. It is not competitive for tournaments. It's just so hard to score the points that you need. Just in the event someone was concerned about balance. We did try to break it before we included it. Tried quite heavily. Poor Alex had to deal with a lot of those playtests. Next variant, though, is the Bane Hammer. It comes with a hull-mounted tremor cannon. The tremor cannon is a very potent weapon. It uses a 15-inch blast template, so a 16-inch of range. The inner ring is strength 10. The middle ring is strength 7, and the outer ring is strength 4, with AP 2+ across the board. And it has Earthshock, so any unit it hits moves, advances, charge, falls back at half speed until your next command phase. That's really good for locking down an enemy target. The tank also has a transport of 25 with 5 fire points on each front, side, and rear. This allows the tank to be a pretty good bastion of fire, not particularly fast as a transport, but it's able to control the enemy quite well and keep them at bay until you can deal with them through excessive amounts of shooting, hopefully remove them, or if you can't, just keep them locked down while you control the rest of the battlefield. There is the Bane Sword, which has another Earthshock weapon. This one, we wanted to go back into lore accuracy. So the Quake Cannon has a range of 240 inches, strength 9, AP 3+, with a 10-inch blast and ordnance, and it can also fire indirectly. It doesn't have the transport capacity of the former tank, but it is capable of firing long range indirectly and pounding an enemy. This one is very much so best suited for Apocalypse, where it's able to utilize its range and punish enemy forces on another table or another side of the living room. There's the Doomhammer, which has a hull-mounted magma cannon. We're back to the transport 25 capacity here. The magma cannon is a 60-inch, strength 10, AP 1+, with a 5-inch blast melta. It doesn't hit particularly hard compared to some of these others unless you're within half range. This one is very well suited for a variety of very heavily armored targets and Titanic targets. There is The Hellhammer, which is one of my favorite options, has this very stubby cannon. It's a little short ranged. It's turret based like the Baneblade, with a coaxial autocannon. It gets to keep its Demolisher cannon because you're not using one of its hull mounted main cannon variants. It's 36-inch range, strength 10, AP 2 plus with a 10-inch blast, ordnance, and it ignores cover. If you wanted to take a unit to deal with those Tyranids like I had been in that former battle example, this would have been the weapon for it. You can only run one in a standard game though, so you can't exactly bring three to bear and just like punch monsters straight out of it, which is what I needed to do. But all of its infantry and monstrous infantry support would have been removed very, very quickly had they chosen to just stay there and cover. This is a really fun cannon. Really puts the pressure on the enemy to keep moving towards you, which can then open them up to mass amounts of lasgun fire, the Demolisher cannon, that kind of thing. But without its really extended range, it's not able to deal well with other Titanic targets and large-scale battles. There is the classic Shadow Sword. This is the Volcano Cannon hull-mounted variant that is used to hunt Titans that everyone knows and loves. It has a 5-inch Destroyer Blast with a 120-inch range. It's a lot of fun. It also has Shadow Sword sensors that it can take, and that lets it reroll all to hit and scatter dice when targeting Titanic units. This does have a variant that you can purchase thanks to Old Forge World. It's a Mars pattern. If you do so, you suffer 2 less wounds because it has a lighter chassis. They stripped out about 5% of the superstructure to make room for bigger reactors and engines, as well as additional armor plating on the guns. And the Volcano Cannon cannot be disabled. This can be very critical. Once again, it's very hard to find these old patterns, and this does remind me, going back to the Baneblade, traditional Baneblade, they can upgrade to the Mars pattern as well, which protects the Demolisher cannon and then the turret coaxial cannons as well. They also have a Lucius pattern where you also lose 2 wounds, but you gain movement +2. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that can really make the difference for a Baneblade needing to get into position, especially when you want to run like a recon variant. Going forward into the Stormblade, we have once again a Forge World variant here. It carries the awesome looking Plasma Blast Gun with a coaxial heavy bolter. It drops. The Plasma Blast Gun has a range of 72, strength 9, AP 2 plus, heavy 2, 7-inch blast, ordnance, monster bane, coaxial. With that coaxial heavy bolter and getting roll both those accuracies, I own one of these tanks that I picked up off eBay and professionally painted, and I just left it alone so I wouldn't ruin it. I've had a lot of fun with this tank every time. It looks very imposing, the 7-inch blast and dropping 2 of them, while it doesn't have ignore cover or the strength and the 10-inch blast of like the Baneblade cannon. Or like the Hellhammer's cannon or anything like that. It does get to drop 2, and that just makes it very general purpose. I've been very pleased with it. It has a very good niche. At this point in time, I own 19 Baneblade chassis, and this one feels very unique, and I was originally concerned it was going to get drowned in just a sheer variety of weapons that can be taken on them, and this was not the case. There is a Stormlord variant, getting back up to Transport 25 again. This one has a Vulcan Mega Blaster, Mega Bolter, which is a heavy 20, strength 6, AP 3 plus, with 60 inches of range. It also has a rule called Full Power to the Weapon. Back in old editions, it could sit still to fire the weapon twice, and while it's impressive, it still hits on 4s. It cannot become any kind of like commander like a Baneblade can, so it can't ever get to the 3s. And rerolling 1s is a very rare ability in the Imperial Guard, unless you're Cadian. So One of the things we did after extensive testing is with full power to the weapon, it can just fire the Vulcan Mega Bolter twice per shooting phase. It brings it up to about 600 points, but that's 40 shots of very punishing heavy infantry killing weaponry. You do have to be aware if the main weapon is disabled, full power to the weapon is of course disabled as well. But it does let it drain a lot of fire onto the target. It's good for close counter support, as most Baneblade variants have massive cannons that are far too dangerous to shoot near your troops because just a slight scatter will just annihilate them. This is one of the safe close support weapons you can use, and that's where I like to preferably field mine. Getting back to Epic 40k, there is a Baneblade variant. It's a Stormhammer Lucius pattern. It has 28 wounds, and it comes with two linked battle cannon turrets. Awesome amounts of firepower. It's one of the lighter hitting out of all the Baneblade variants due to being just standard battle cannons, but you get 4 of them. It also comes with 4 las cannons and 2 sets of 2 linked heavy flamers, any of which can be switched out to 2 linked heavy bolters. It can take missiles, dozer blades, and pintles as normal. For those of you wondering, it's just 1 pintle still. Per everything I can find, you didn't put pintles on both turret options, is always the tallest one. Still the transport of 12, it can be quite potent, and coming in at just under 1,000 points, it's definitely a large chunk of your army. It can be very imposing. I myself am working on getting one converted someday, so that way I can have one in 28mm, as they never made it properly in scale. There is the Forge World Stormhammer Mars Alpha pattern. This is a bit of a different one, as it has a different set of sponsons, but it comes with a Stormhammer cannon, which isn't particularly potent. It's basically a glorified Earthshaker cannon. Only 60 inches of range, but it has AP of 2+. It is coaxial with a multi-laser. It can be swapped out for a Stormhammer cannon with a coaxial las cannon if you wish. Not particularly accurate on that front, but it is a little more anti-armor firepower you can bring. It gets 2 linked battle cannons in the hull, and then it has a las cannon in the hull as well. And its sponsons can be 6 multi-lasers, or can be upgraded to 6 las cannons, all facing in slightly different directions. They can overlap and do full broadsides, but are not able to bring it to bear forward or backwards very well. And it gets all the standard dozer missile pintle options. These are really hard to come by as well. I'm still working on getting one myself. I think it's a really cool, unique model. It brings a lot of different flexibility compared to the Stormhammer Lucius. It's always had a unique place in my heart. I've always wanted one. And we're finally almost done with Baneblades here. The last one is the Storm Sword. It's another one of those fixed turret weapons. It's a 36-inch range, strength 10, AP 1+. The 10-inch blast ordnance that ignores cover. It's always been a bit lacking, so after some extensive testing and rule summary a long time ago, we came up with the ignore cover. It brings it in a little bit cheaper, not by much, than what the Stormhammer does, but it doesn't have the weapon flexibility of the Hellhammer, that the Hellhammer has. Hellhammer is overall going to be a superior tank due to its Demolisher cannon and coaxial autocannon allowing for accuracy. This is definitely just a cheaper way to bring that kind of firepower to bear in the main cannon. It does have AP 1+, making it a little more punishing for vehicles as well. So the Storm Sword is a good option for pushing through enemy lines and really forcing your way through as a line breaker. Getting into the Macarius, there's quite a few Macarius chassis here. They're basically, in lore, a easier to produce Titanic super heavy tank. Of course, they're Forge World only, so they cost quite a bit, and you don't see them too often. though with the latest trend, hopefully we'll see them in plastic soon. The first one is a Crassus. It's a transport variant with infantry orders 1. I know technically it's not a battle tank, but its main counterpart is, so I'm just going to include it here. It transports 35 axis in the rear, and one of the things we decided it should do as an infantry command tank is, a forward command tank. It should have orders, which allow it to disembark quite a few troops, small platoon, and then reinforce them with orders and help them focus on what they need to do, which is claim objectives in hostile territory. It has 4 sponson weapons, pretty limited access of heavy flamer, bolter, autocannon, or las cannon, and take the usual upgrades. The Dominus Bombard, once again, is getting into more of an artillery thing. It's never had an official model, but has had several official data sheets throughout the years. I should mention that the Macarius is movement of 8. It's a little faster than the Baneblade. Armor is the same with 20 wounds, 6 attacks each. The Dominus Bombard has 3 linked Colossus siege mortars. They are very terrifying mortars. 24 to 24, 240-inch range, strength 6, AP 3. 3 shots, 7-inch blast, ordnance, indirect fire, and ignores cover. Removing troops from enemy positions is exactly what this was designed to do, and it doesn't care how far away, it's going to do it to you. There is a Gorgon variant. This thing has 24 wounds. It has an extra wide chassis and has a special ram plow, giving it a front armor of 15, side armor of 14. It's been heavily up armored. Transports 50 as axis front and rear and has an assault ramp, allowing units to charge straight out. They can take special mortars on the side or a couple of standard machine guns or flamers. It has some additional heavy stubbers in the front. It's supposed to resemble a Higgins boat, but on land. Most notably is its massive plow. It is strength destroyer with accurate. This allows it to go toe-to-toe with Titans, not particularly accurately, but it can knock over an Imperial Knight if it needs to, have done so as well. It can also completely fail and be destroyed, which I have also done. You have the proper Macarius battle tank, which is just 2 linked battle cannons for the turret. And then it has 2 linked heavy stubber in the hull, and it can optionally take single sponson weapons. The Macarius Omega, I'm very fortunate to own, due to a very good friend and painting commission. It is the plasma blast gun that we love so much, but it's strapped in the hull and it's too big to fit, so it's side saddle mounted. It does not get the coaxial heavy bolter of the Baneblade variant, but because it's open-topped, it comes in at 392 points, has no additional weapons of any kind on it by default, though it can take sponson weapons. It just brings a lot of firepower for very cost-effective and a very cool-looking model. Very hard to find. There are some recasts floating around on eBay now and then, but overall, definitely my favorite Macarius tank at all times. And I'll try to have a picture available for this upcoming video. The Macarius Vanquisher has 2 linked long Vanquisher cannons. This gives them because of accurate, a 3+ to hit with 2 destroyer weapons that are not blast of any kind. It's a good way to, for a budget, challenge Titanic models at range. The Macarius Vulcan has a Vulcan Mega Bolter for the turret. It does not have full power to the guns, but it comes in at about 200 points cheaper, which is very hard to argue with. It's a very affordable Lord of War with a punishing heavy infantry firepower. Mine is named the Sir Mulch-a-Lot for my Praetorian Guard and has a history of mulching rubric marines and Terminators, and every time I've fielded it, I've always enjoyed rolling tons of dice with them, and if it's ever destroyed or chased off, it doesn't feel too bad due to its low point cost. Last out of these is the Praetor Launcher. It's another artillery variant. It has the Pilum Salvo, which is a heavy 5, strength 9, AP 2+ ordnance weapon with anti-air rule, 12 to 120 inch range. Basically, it just pulverizes aircraft with high amounts of rockets. It's one of the most devastating anti-air weapons in the game for its points. It is, however, only good at exactly that. You can upgrade that to the Foe Hammer for a massive increase in points. It maintains the same range with strength 8, AP 3+, but then fires an Apocalypse Barrage that has the ordnance and indirect fire rule. It definitely is one of the more potent artillery units that just all around can hit just about any target outside of a Lehman Russ or a Land Raider, and it's very punishing. Despite having some bad rolls the games we were testing this, I was still able to do quite a bit of firepower and really force the enemy to focus on it, and that was able to spare my army quite a bit of incoming fire for quite some time. A bit of a long one. That's why I want to do just the battle tanks this time. They're quite devastating. They're quite heavily armored. Almost all of them are rolling in with an armor of 14, or if they're not, they're rolling in with armor of 13 with like huge wound count. The few light tanks you have are very fast. They're still fairly heavily armored as far as light tanks go, and they bring a variety of weapons that are very good for flanking and closing in with the enemy. For those of you who are thinking about joining the Imperial Guard, if you're a World War II fan and you love huge tank formations and iconic tanks, this is definitely the army for you. There's a lot of speculation of what tank is based off of which. I won't get into that for this one here, but I will say you will love this army. As a World War II army, the tanks really drive home that feel with giant fielding formations. Their lore is one of the things I love about it. It's just the massive manpower that they bring and war materials. They may not be a highly sophisticated Chaos Space Marine that has 100 years of combat experience and bloodshed and torture under his belt, but he did bring 400 of his buddies, and he's going to get you sooner or later through just volume of fire. At which point, all that torture, bloodshed, and heresy has meant nothing except for death. And that's what anyone's vile Xenos or heretic should deserve for defying the Emperor. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gives you a bit of an oversight as to how many tanks are available, how many old tanks have existed in the Imperial Guard, and I hope you give this a try sometime for you Imperial Guard players if you can find someone willing to play alternate rules. I think you're going to really enjoy the feel that this army brings. I've still got a few more videos for the Imperial Guard to do. It's a very large codex due to how long they've been around, but I still need to do support tanks like artillery, armored cars, sentinels, flyers, dedicated transports, but we are just about there. Anyways, if you don't want to miss any kind of update, please hit subscribe. Appreciate you hitting like. Drop a comment. Any feedback is good, preferably constructive. Just we always want to improve our presentation. I don't make any money at this, so I don't have any kind of professional editors. But if you notice any typos or have concerns for balance or potentially a unit I've missed from days of yore, please reach out and let me know. I want to include every unit that's ever existed. Otherwise, appreciate you listening to this, and I hope to see you in the next one.